Okay, so I think we're good to start. I think most people are logged in, which is fantastic. So yeah, welcome to our second Let's Talk session. And this is a very exciting one. This is guest-centric revenue optimization. Sounds like a whole lot of big words. We'll unpack it in a moment. But just before we start, just a little bit, you're all on mute. Obviously, just to keep the sound clear for everybody to hear. But at the bottom of the screen, there's a chat box. Do pop in any questions that you may have. And then between Niels and myself, we'll try and answer that towards the end if there's some time. Otherwise, we'll reach out to you and see if we can help you in any way. But yeah, and my guest speaker today is Niels from Sendine. Very excited to be speaking to him. And I think in the spirit of guest-centric, where it's obviously all about the guest, the client, the customer, Niels can introduce himself, and tell us a little bit about where the passion for revenue management comes from.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Yes, well, I've been in revenue management almost since I was born now. I started in revenue management with Hilton, where, you know, sort of the fire was lit. And I was with Hilton installing computer programs, PMS, front office systems, sales and catering systems. And then I sort of got diverted into revenue management a bit. And that's where I got my passion from. And worked for a couple of companies, Ideas, Easy RMS, and some other smaller companies. But I've really been sort of very passionate about how to drive revenue management forward. So, you know, over the last 20 years, it's been really exciting to see where we're going. But one of the things I always found with revenue management was that disconnect between, you know, the rest of the hotel business. You know, there always seemed to be that, you know, revenue manager, gatekeeper that was preventing the rest of the hotel from doing their business. And this is where I, you know, always thought we need to sort of combine this and we need to work together more. Yeah. And that's where my passion came from. It's really trying to, you know, make revenue management more accessible to everyone, but also make it more guest friendly. So that's where the passion comes from, and that's the passion I have.
Quite interesting. I'm sure all the sales and marketing people that's on the call today are absolutely loving what you're saying. we don't always hold the whip, you know. But yes, no, for sure. And tell me, any good memories that you have? What is your best memories out of revenue management?
It's quite interesting because, you know, revenue management is so broad. But one of the things I always remember is I once arrived in a hotel in Berlin, and this was, you know, I was fortunate enough to be in a high-end luxury hotel. And when I checked in quite late, and the lady at reception said, "Oh, you're quite late, and, you know, would you like me to make a reservation in our restaurant? We've got a guest chef from one of our sister properties in Asia that's only here for 2 weeks, so it's really something quite unique. Would you like me to make you a table booking so you at least have the ability to experience that?" And then I got into the lift and the bellboy actually joined me in the lift, which I thought was kind of unusual. But then the bellboy started talking to me and talking about the cocktail they had in the bar in that hotel, and that it was unique and I should try it. And lo and behold, I did try it. You know, did have you know, a good effect. And then I came to the room, and I didn't want to go to the restaurant because, you know, I was traveling by myself and I hate eating in a restaurant by myself. So I ordered some room service, and, you know, 20 minutes after it was delivered, I received a phone call, you know, "Can we come and collect your tray? And, you know, you didn't have a dessert. Would you like?" And they started suggesting dessert. So when I joined the revenue management meeting the next day, the GM was very passionate about involving everyone within the organization in that revenue meeting. Head dishwash, executive housekeeper, everyone had to attend a meeting once a month. So all department heads, maintenance, no matter what, they had to attend and they had to contribute. And some of the best ideas that they had came from, these heads of department that normally wouldn't be involved in these, revenue management kind of decisions and suggestions. So it was by involving the whole organization that they actually really got this mentality throughout their hotel, that everybody was sort of focused on selling, or how to, it was done in a pleasant way, so it was a nice way of selling, but it was very cleverly done. And I think that's one of the things that they'll always remember, and that's one of my biggest learning experiences, because that's where I thought, yeah, this is done right. Because if you do it right, the guests will feel well, and at the same time you'll be able to sell more as well. So that's where that comes from. What about you, Teresa? I mean, you're hosting this, but where does your passion come from in revenue management?
You know what? I think I was born with quite a problem-solving, logical mind. I remember as a teenager, I used to make my own clothing, but up until today, I can't read a pattern. I used to have to create my own patterns and then make my own clothing from it. And I think from that, I mean, the satisfaction of being able to create something and start it from scratch. And then one of my general managers was Mac McCaffrey, second hotel I worked for, and he was a chartered accountant. Mm-hmm. And he made me look at every single rand that I made and brought into the hotel. It's a little bit more strict, I think, than your story, but I mean, from there it was quite challenging. And I remember challenging my previous owner that I worked with, Lex Bertucci from Vineyard Group, because at the time that I sort of went into revenue management, it wasn't a big thing in South Africa as yet, still in the entry stages. And I was sort of self-taught, and I thought, how can I improve myself? How can I do things better? Because that's just what I thrive on. And I remember us approaching a consulting company, Ideas, you've mentioned them earlier as well, to come out and audit me and tell me how my department was running. Boy, did I make a mistake of what was going to come out in that audit. It was really, really tough. But you know what? My proudest moment is that person that ordered me. I remember we having a huge argument, and he was like, he's going to, if I had to work for him, he'll be firing me. But today he recommends me. So it's quite a turning point. But yeah, no, I love the challenge of looking at things differently and seeing how we can like throw it on its head and create different outcomes. Yeah, that's what I sort of thrive on.
Yeah. I think they're very similar things that drive our passions, right? So it's good to see.
Yes. Oh. So let's talk a bit about the COVID impact. Let's talk about the hard stuff. It's obviously was quite a big impact on the hotel industry. Is a big impact. What do you think? Do you think revenue managers were caught off guard?
I think a lot of them were, and I think all of us were caught off guard to a certain extent, because nobody saw this coming and nobody realized the kind of impact it would have. But that set aside, it was I mentioned it earlier today. I saw this interview with one of the co-founders of Trailfinders, the travel company. And he was very buoyant about the bounce back after COVID-19, and I think, and I agree with that, because people I speak to, we're doing a Zoom call now, but people are developing Zoom fatigue, I like to call it, because what you see is people are so eager to meet in person again and have meetings again. And this is something, in the beginning it was all like, oh, Zoom is going to solve everything and we can do everything via Zoom. But now you can sort of see that itchiness, and there's not everything, Zoom doesn't relay everything, doesn't relay body language, etc. So that's one of the things that you have with Zoom, that it's still there's this distance between you and the audience. So I believe that there's going to be a huge bounce back, and people also want to travel. Everybody I speak to says, oh, I can't wait to book my next holiday. So it will come back. But one area that I think a lot of hoteliers still made the mistake is we see that downturn and everybody immediately drops their rates. And that really frustrates me because if anything, the people that are still traveling are, probably need to travel. There's this, unless it's local tourism, but a lot of the sort of business travelers that are traveling need to travel, and if you offer them rock bottom prices, you're going to have to cut somewhere, and that cutting could go at the expense of your guests. So when I speak to hoteliers, I say, try not to cut your prices so much, but try to offer more service. So you still, it's going to cost you more, absolutely, but go out of your way in showing what you're doing in order to give them that safe experience. And how the number of websites I go to, hotel websites, and I look on there and there's nothing about what they're doing about COVID, or it's on page number 15, and I have to really dig to find those, what the SOPs that they've put in place for COVID. It's just too far. My advice: always put it on your website, say what you're doing, and put a clear message out there. You're there to keep your guests safe. And don't try and hide it. Don't, forget about it, but, make it very vocal and make it very, very visible. So that's, for me, the biggest mistakes that hoteliers have made, dropping their rates and not being, vocal enough about what they're doing to keep their guests safe.
So true. Many times I speak to people and I say, we need to give more value. You don't always have to give a discount, and put it in, and it's fascinates me when you speak to people and you say it doesn't have to be anything big, it's just about enhancing the experience, and hoteliers are like, yeah, but we do that. I'm like, but nobody knows that, and we can't see it, it's not visible, exactly like you're saying with the COVID information as well, because we are seeing that in statistics. People are booking directly, so they want to get trust. They want to build a relationship as opposed to going through an OTA where it's easy to business. But yeah, they don't. We need to speak and we need to be open about what it is that we're offering and putting in that place.
Yeah. And like you said, sorry.
I also think one of the things that, we were caught off guard a little bit is, we're all very good in Hilding in high demand, and I hear it so often. I mean, people tell me that it's like, oh, well, what can revenue management do now? I mean, there is no demand, and it's like, yeah, because we're so accustomed, especially in South Africa, especially in Cape Town, where it's very international touristy, we are accustomed to Hilding in that high demand. And now that we have lower demand, we're a little bit lost and not quite sure what are we meant to do at this stage. So I thought that's one thing as well that we were caught out really, really bad with. And now we're having to educate ourselves and see what we do in distressed demand.
Yeah, no, exactly. And we had 12 years of growth, because since 2008, it's really been going uphill, and we've been in a luxurious situation. I don't think that hotels in the past have seen such a long, prolonged period of growth. And it's interesting because, what a pandemic brings is, sort of going back to realization of, yes, it is the guest that is actually important to us. And how do we bring this guest back? And in revenue management, because of this upturn, this continuous upturn for 12 years, we've been controlling these prices, and that was, the main focus is, what prices are we charging, and rate management, and that was all the focus. But sometimes we forgot a little bit about the guests, and yeah, it's interesting to see that we're going back to looking at the guests and how can we accommodate the guest again. And this leads back to, if you look at marketing is all about marketing the experience of the hotel. And if you ask any general manager, they will tell you, my hotel is, it's not a hotel room, it's an experience that you have. And you design a hotel room in a specific way, then it's an experience. Yet if you go back to revenue management, it's becoming more and more of a commodity. So, a commodity is great, but let's try and focus on that experience, and let's not be price driven so much, but let's be more product driven. And And this is, something that it's good to see that hoteliers are seeing that, and maybe it's a blessing in disguise for the longer term. That we had maybe not so much of a downturn, but that there was a bump in the road, because it just allows us to refocus and sort of look at things again, and maybe say, okay, let's change our ways. But do you think they could have done anything better, Teresa? Hoteliers?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do think there's some stuff that we could have done better. And I mean, I'm not taking away, it's been a really, really tough time for everybody, and we probably have all done the best we can. But other than the pricing that we're touching on, we probably will unpack more during this call, I think communication is one thing that I would have liked to see hoteliers focus more on. I travel quite a lot locally, but nothing came my way telling me that my hotels or properties that I stay at are still here. What are they doing? And I think we sort of have a bit of a pride that we don't want to share. Like we're struggling. We're all struggling. It's true. But everybody that's traveling is becoming more emotionally invested in what it is that they want to spend their money on, what it is that they're going to spend their time on, so communicate. I think it's such a key thing, which is probably not, people probably frown at me because as in a revenue world, I mean, communication sounds a bit strange, but I mean, we're here now to look at different ways of doing things. What do you think about communication, and do you think that's something that hotels?
I think you hit the nail on the head there, and I think communication is absolute key. And I think one of the, with the pricing that I mentioned earlier, what comes with that pricing is a sort of wide net approach. So when we communicate with our guests, hoteliers often design a hotel with the intent of addressing a specific type of guests. And then we change our ways when we see that we're not hitting our occupancy, and we just go like, okay, well, let's drop our rates in order to drive our occupancy, and forget all about that experience that we designed for a specific guest type. And one of the things that I always believe is that when you communicate, you should communicate with your guests, and don't just send out an email blast to your entire email database, because that's not going to be that effective, because we receive so many emails on a daily basis. So what's much easier or much better to do, it's not easier, it's actually harder to do, is narrow that down and start putting some filters on those email addresses and say, okay, let's not address the entire world, let's address a specific market, and you can filter it down to country, and say, let's just focus on the South African market, and maybe we just focus on Natal, or maybe we just focus on the Cape Province. But first of all, narrow it down geographically, and then if you can, try and see, which of my guests actually use the spa, and filter it down to, for instance, spa guests that came from Natal or the Cape Province or Gauteng or whatever it might be, and then there you actually target and try and make it as personal as possible. You can use MailChimp, you can use, all kinds of tools in order to get that message out there. And it doesn't have to be expensive, but it's something that is crucial if you're communicating to your guests nowadays, is that it becomes personal. And even if you do it via, social media, it just needs to be personal. And the more personal you can get, the better it is. And the same goes for confirmation, emails that go out. If there is any way of personalizing them, it makes so much of a difference, because just think of it yourself. When you receive a personalized email, it's so much more rewarding. Although you probably do know that it's a computer program that generated it, it's so much nicer to receive something personal than, I always use the example, if I turn up at a Hilton or Marriott, and I stay there 20 nights before, and I get told, well, have you stayed with us before? And the best example is when I was actually working for Hilton. I used to stay at one hotel, And I'll never forget, I left Hilton for ideas, and I checked out in May, and I asked the front desk lady where I checked out how many nights I'd stayed that year. And she said, "Oh my God, you've stayed 125 nights in that year." And when I then walked into the breakfast room, there was this lady standing there, and she was there every single day. So I saw her every single day, and she looked at me and she said, "Are you with the Thompson Group?" And I thought, that's exactly the kind of behavior that we don't want to encourage, because I just laughed. But you sort of think, like, if you're a guest, that would be a reason for me to say, okay, I'm not going to stay there again, because they really don't care about me.
Yeah, they always say it's not what people do, or it's how people made you feel, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what really, really counts. And it's that connection with your name. There's quite a big thing in that. I mean, I get automated emails with my name in it. I mean, those are the ones that probably don't delete straight away. But the ones that just like, "Dear so-and-so," with no name, I probably don't read those as often as I should. No, it's very, very important to connect. And I do get especially now, it's always been important, but especially now, is how do we bring that guest experience back into how we generate revenue for the hotels. Totally, totally agree with it. What do you think hoteliers should be focusing on now that they're sort of seeing a change in the future? What aspects within revenue do you think they should be focusing on?
Well, like I said, I think the emailing is one start, and being more personal. But I think one of the things that hoteliers might or might not do is forecasting, and especially longer term forecasting. And for me, I always say, the long term is where you can make the real money. The short term is where you can penny pinch. And if you are aware of what your demand should be 6 months out or even a year out, you can start setting pricing strategies for that longer period, and you can already sort of start capturing that, the best prices for those periods. So for me, it's essential to take the time to create a forecast, do it on a ideally weekly basis or even monthly basis if you don't have the time, but try and create this forecast, because once you have that forecast, it becomes so much easier to define what your pricing is. And don't do a month total forecast, do a daily forecast. And don't forget, 6 months out or even 12 months out, it doesn't have to be spot on. What you just want to create for yourself is what is a normal pattern. And one thing that I always used to do is I always used to take a report from my PMS and actually print out or just copy all of the historic daily production into Excel. And that's what I use as my basis. And because generally what happens year over year is similar. Now we're coming out of the pandemic, it's going to be very different. So, you're going to have to probably be a little bit more conservative. But having said that, I totally agree with the Trail Finders co-founder. I believe that once people are confident again and once people are happy again, that this pandemic is behind us, and the signs are very encouraging. The Pfizer vaccine seems to be working well. The Moderna vaccine seems to be working even better. And the good thing about the Moderna vaccine is that it doesn't have the logistical problems that the Pfizer vaccine has, because Pfizer vaccine needs to be kept at minus 70 degrees Celsius, which is quite a logistical nightmare. Whereas the Moderna vaccine can be transported at normal household freezer temperatures, so minus 20. It can be stored for 6 months, and even for 30 days it can be stored at normal refrigerator temperature. So it's far easier to manage logistically. So, once these vaccines come and start to become implemented, and there are some people that say that next month we're going to start seeing the first vaccinations. So that's very encouraging. And once that starts happening, that's when we will see travel coming back. And I think it will come back with a vengeance. So we need to be prepared for it. And I think that one of the only limitation that we're going to see is possibly reduced capacity in air travel, air transport, because a lot of airlines have actually mothballed a lot of their fleet, and they're not going to be able to bring them back that quickly. So you'll see reduced capacity in airlines. So that's going to limit us a little bit, but I truly believe that a lot of guests will come back with a vengeance and are willing to spend and will go all out. So once we get back to normality, it will be with a bang, but I think we need to be prepared for it. So I think we need to, make sure that we keep a monitor on what's going on, and that's why these forecasts are so important, to keep on monitoring what's coming in. What are the new reservations coming in, and look, a little bit longer out.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, oh, I'm so sorry, there's a noise in the background. Yeah, so I think forecasting is so important. And if I can just emphasize that, so many people would make comments and say, well, there's nothing to forecast, but there is. And what it is, we don't want to see a budget. We don't want to see how we're performing against last year. I mean, that's just depressing. What we want to see is what can we see from new guests behavior? When is my guest coming in? And as you said, don't look at it at a monthly aspect. I mean, take it by day. I want to understand that on a Saturday, I get 2 or 3 rooms in, and those will book with me on the Wednesday before, or whatever the pattern is. But that's what we're looking for. And that's what we need to work on, so that we can then optimize in that space. And optimizing can be, how do we sell? What is the length of stay? But it can also be, how do we upsell? Because once we have a customer that's already coming in, I mean, how do we optimize the revenue from that aspect? But yeah, I mean, it's faced so many times with people like, oh no, we can't forecast. We definitely forecast. It's not what we're used to doing as forecasting. I think misconception of what forecasting is.
And I think, this is something that's not new, but I think now, especially in these times, people need to change their approach to certain aspects of revenue management. And I think forecasting is one of them. And forecasting, people believe that forecast should be an accurate representation of what you're going to end up with on the day of arrival. And really, that's not the point about forecasting. Forecast should be dynamic. Forecast should be a representation of what's going to happen if you continue what you're doing at the moment. And so if forecasts are static, so if you forecast now that you're going to end up with a 60% occupancy on a Wednesday 6 months from now, and you end up at that's not a good forecast for me. That is, well, it's a good forecast, but it's bad management. So what you should do is, if you see that, and you see that you're going to end up at 60% occupancy on a Wednesday 2 months ago, is do everything in your might to try and push that up to 70%. And that's where you should use your forecast and say, okay, based on what I can see coming in, what do I think I'm going to end up with? And look at how many reservations are being made. So on a typical Wednesday, 3 months out, how many reservations do I typically see? And this is something that you can, comes with experience. And if you do it week in, week out, or month in, month out, it really helps you sort of getting that understanding and getting the feeling for the business. And it allows you to become much better at managing that demand and managing your rates. So that's something that I believe, we're starting to see, yes, with the introduction of the vaccines, we're starting to see, more lights at the end of the tunnel, which is great. But it does mean that, we need to be ready, and pricing is great, and having a public rate is great. but think about, packaging, think about, your room type upgrades. And the times I see hotels having static supplements for room types, I think there's a time to change this, and this is a prime opportunity. If you have an occupancy of 50%, and you have, superior room types that you're trying to sell, if the supplement is double that of what the price is for a base room type, it becomes very hard to sell that proposition. So my advice to fellow hoteliers is always, if you have the opportunity to drop that supplement, if you don't have demand for that room type, that is a much better way to go. We always are very easy in upgrading people when they arrive at the hotel. Oh, we don't have any more standard doubles, so let's upgrade them into another room type. Yet dropping that supplement is something that we see a lot of resistance towards. Yet, dropping that supplement gets you some extra money, whereas upgrading doesn't get you any extra money. So, even if you can sell it for, let's say, 50 Rand extra, or $5 or $10 extra, it's really the idea of getting a little bit of extra money. And what you get as well is the guest gets that sense of satisfaction, because they see, oh wow, I've got a great deal here. Normally it's $50, now it's $10, so I'm getting a great deal here. So that's something that's very important, is trying to find ways to incentivize your guests and to get them to spend more money and to come to your hotel without you having to drop your rates. So that's where I believe we should change our approach, and it should be more around the experience we're offering, rather than the price and purely a financial drive that we give our guests. Let's put it like that.
We can also use that example to challenge everybody on the call. We go back to the hotel and challenge the norm, challenge what we always do. I mean, I walk into the hotels and we look at different room types, and I find it quite often in African countries, suites are something that we just don't discount. That's the price and that's what we sell it on. But you have more than enough demand for your lower end room. So why don't we just bring it a little bit closer? They would rather oversell and upgrade free of charge than bring down the price and get a couple of Rand in that higher room type. I don't say everybody does that, but that's how we sort of brainwashed in, that's how we do business, because that's a slightly better room, so you have to pay for it. Yes, but you don't have to pay that amount. So go back and have a look at your pricing structures. I mean, what can you do different? There's not a big difference in your room types. I mean, remember, we created room types to increase revenue opportunities for ourselves, and if there isn't a big difference and there isn't demand now like we are seeing now, I mean, must somebody pay that up supplement? I mean, would you not just be better in selling it for a small difference or no difference at all? I mean, just go look at it, just challenge what it is, what we normally do. Yeah.
Well, I think there's one thing that we have to be very clear about is, I think you mentioned suites, and obviously it's not presidential suites, because presidential suites are a unique product, and I don't believe in reducing price for presidential suites. There's absolutely no need for it, and it would be stupidity, because you're not going to drive demand for a presidential suite, right? However, junior suites or superior rooms, absolutely. As long as it's not something too much of a unique product, because I believe unique products should stay unique and should retain their uniqueness. And there's a huge cost as well that comes with a presidential suite. So that's one of the things that we obviously understand. But yeah, it's those junior suites and those superior room types. That's where what we're talking about, obviously.
Yes, absolutely. I get so excited. I mean, don't forget about the cost factor, my word. Oh. So,
Right.
just bringing it back to guest, if you don't mind. I mean, management, I can talk forever. Do you think guest requirements and guest decision making is different now?
Yes, I think obviously with COVID, people want their safety guaranteed, and it's quite interesting because there was some research done into the contactless check-ins and contactless environments in hotels, and it turned out that guests aren't necessarily worried about contactless check-in. What they are much more worried about is cleanliness. Have my rooms been cleaned properly? Has everything been disinfected, sanitized, etc.? And I believe that a lot of guests are actually willing to pay a little bit more if they get that sense of safety. If you can guarantee them. I saw one hotel here in the UK actually that had a policy that they left every room unoccupied for 2 nights before they let the next guest in. And that was their policy. And then on their website, they actually mentioned that you had the choice of 3 levels of housekeeping, no housekeeping whatsoever, so nobody enters your room. You had housekeeping, just upon requirement, so you could just call them, or you could have normal housekeeping as always. But they guaranteed that their housekeeping staff were wearing masks. They wore like these slippers and things like that, so they were totally covered up, probably in hazmat suits, to be honest. But they were COVID safe. Let's put it like that. And what was interesting is that they actually had a much higher occupancy than other comparable hotels, although they were probably twice the price of other comparable hotels. And that was purely because they offered this, this extra service, and people felt safe. So, when you saw the hotel and when you saw that website, it was very clear that they had the guest at the heart of their thoughts and their concerns. So everything was done in order to keep that guest safe, and people were willing to pay more for it. This was a 5-star deluxe hotel, obviously, but they're currently charging, it's £450 a night, so that's $550 a night, which is quite substantial in the current market. And they're running at an occupancy of 60%, so they're not doing badly. So it's something that it's all about perception. It's all about giving that guest what they want, and this is where we sometimes as hoteliers are so eager to show what we want to show on our website, and we want to show off that corner of the hotel and that specific angle of view. But we forget that our guests don't necessarily want to see that. And that's where the OTAs are very clever, that they're always looking at, okay, what does the guest want? And they will show what the guest wants to see, whereas we're trying to always relay what we want our guests to see and not what we don't want our guests to see. And sometimes it's just, we just need to communicate. And COVID measures, everybody's doing so much to put COVID measures in place, yet we don't shout about it. Because I've heard general managers say, well, we don't shout about it just because we've always done this, and this is something that's pretty much normal to us. We've always been very clean, but the guest doesn't know that, and that's why we need to reiterate it and sort of be very vocal about it. Having said that, I think once COVID has passed and once it's we go back to the so-called normal, I think that COVID will disappear as quickly as we've seen other, disasters that have had a big impact on our world will disappear, and we'll go back to relative, almost complete normality. I think cleaning will stay, but I think people will forget sooner than we expect about COVID and about what happened, because we're creatures of habit, and we want to forget, and we we hate to think about the bad things, and I think we'll go back to relative normality relatively soon, and hopefully next sort of July, August. I have a feeling that we will have the majority of it behind us, and although it's taken much longer than any of us would have anticipated at the beginning.
For sure. No, I do agree with you. I think so many people are saying things has changed forever. But I think especially in the beginning of COVID, we were sort of like given the opportunity to think about, what it is that we do and how we are being in this world, etc. But I mean, as we get sort of out of this whole COVID thing, I mean, I can see that in my area where I live as well. I mean, back to normality. I mean, people go on as if there is no COVID going around, and it's because we're craving having to have a routine, a normal, again, we're quite used to.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that we also mustn't forget, I mean, the safety and the cleanliness is very, very important. And we can see that in the statistics, which obviously we focus on quite a bit. Statistically, you can see how people are booking directly with you as opposed to people going through the OTAs. OTAs used to be a lot stronger than our direct booking channels, which is now a little bit reverse. But I think at the moment as well, people are very still emotionally attached on what they're going to spend their money on and how they're going to travel and what the purpose is of traveling. And especially here, I mean, I know like obviously CBD areas are only people where there's business that needs to take place, and that's one thing. But if we do go away for weekends, I mean, we have to understand what the people are looking for. Why are people traveling into those areas? Because that influences how they make their decisions on travel as well. It's also different way of looking to break away from where we are at the moment.
But I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I think that's what guest-centric revenue management is all about as well, right? It's thinking of your guest, and it's thinking what does your guest want, rather than thinking what do I want. And I think that should be at the heart of that's at the heart of hospitality. It's what does my guest want, and that's what we need to try and do in revenue management as well. So it's not all about price. It's not all about how low can I go with my price, or how high should I push my price in order to achieve my maximum revenue. It's about what products do I put out there. So what products do my guests want, and that's the first. That should be the basis of your your revenue management strategy. So you've got your hotel, that's your product that was designed at some stage with the ideal guest profile in mind. And that ideal guest profile should also be in the mind of the revenue manager. So who is my ideal guest? What does my ideal guest want? And that's what your starting point should be. And then with those rooms, packages, experiences, that's how we go to the market. But then also don't just cast a wide net and basically say, okay, I'm going to throw this out to everyone. Try and be focused in your approach and try and really go to your target market, your target audience, in order to try and say, okay, this is especially for you. And if you get that engagement with a specific group, that is a much tighter engagement, and you will see that continued interaction with yourself rather than with an OTA. Because let's face it, in the end, we would much rather deal with a hotel direct. But the only reason we go to OTAs is because we're shopping. But if you find that unique product that really suits you, you're going to like that, and you're going to go back to that product. And that's something that's so important. You don't need technology in order to apply guest-centric revenue management. Like I said earlier, you can just take an extract from your PMS. Well, that's technology, so no new technology, I say. So you can take an extract from your PMS. Everybody can extract a list of guests with email addresses. And what you should try and do is maybe get the last dates that they stayed. If you can get that information, and if you have the information, what additional services did they use? So did they use the spa? You can do that with all kinds of things. You can maybe add notes, etc. So you can actually filter that out. And once you have all of it in Excel, you can just apply filters, right? And you can apply filters, and you could even use mail merge kind of techniques in order to create like email templates, which you can then use to send out to through MailChimp. MailChimp is a technology, but it's a very cheap option. It allows you to send out mass emails to your guest database. You know, if in ideal circumstances, yes, you would get a CRM because MailChimp, one of the hard things with MailChimp is you have to do everything manually. You don't get a lot of feedback on, you know, what happens to emails. And the one thing a CRM does is it tells you who has opened the emails, you know, what they've done, and you can set up journeys. So, you know, if a guest hasn't touched your email for 3 days after they received it, then it automatically sends out a follow-up email saying, you know, you haven't looked at your email. If they have opened that email but haven't done anything with it, you can send another email based on that. Or if they have opened it and they've clicked on the link but they haven't booked, you can, you know, have another follow-up. So you can automate a lot of that stuff. So that's the nice thing about a CRM, but you don't need that. You know, that's the ideal world. That's, you know, sort of the Rolls-Royce option, I always say. You don't need that. You can just use that MailChimp environment where you can just, you know, reach out to your guests. But I think a targeted approach, that's the most important thing. Getting to your guest and knowing, you know, letting your guests know that you know them and that you know what they want. That's far more important than, you know, pricing or, you know, communicating out to the whole world. It's really reaching your true guest. That's important.
It's what I call the spray and pray approach. You know, we just like throw it out there and pray somebody's going to pick it up. But no, it definitely has to be very targeted. And I agree with you that we don't need systems. It definitely can be done on a manual basis, you know, especially if you're a smaller establishment and you understand the importance of being guest-centric in your revenue generation. You know, it can be done manually. MailChimp is a great way. Thanks for highlighting that, but it is a really good tool to use. I mean, automation at the end, especially if you're a bigger establishment as well, I mean, it is key eventually, but work towards that. Put the basics in place and sort of see, okay, well, how can we get closer to being very guest-centric and get the whole team involved. You know, it's not just the marketing person's job or the GM's job. It's also revenue. That's what you're saying, right, Niels?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, that's what, as you say, get everyone involved. And I think that's crucial, and that's one of, you know, the advices that I would give to hoteliers is, if you can, try and work together. Try not to build those silos, because you see that over and over again, that those silos, you know, sort of evolve naturally. And I talked to you about that, Teresa. You know, I had it's actually a friend of mine who runs a hotel in Germany, and he actually every year they do a budgeting retreat. So they take all heads of departments and lock themselves up in a cabin, and for a weekend. So it's not during the week, it's actually the weekend, and they actually create the budget over that weekend. And they take lots of nice food, and they actually together they'll prepare, you know, nice dinners and lunches. So they have a nice time, and you know, there's lots of alcohol flowing in the evenings as well. But
that's when they write the budget, right?
Exactly. But what it helps them do is focus and work together. And you know, the biggest mistake I always see is that in hotels, every head of department creates their budget, and then it gets lumped together, and that becomes the final budget. And you know, the financial controller will then say, okay, well, this doesn't work, and actually rework the budget in order to make it all fit. But there's been no discussion between the departments in order to say, okay, how can we help each other to maximize the total hotel revenue? And that's something that is very important, is working together within the different environments. As you still see those silos, and you still see departments working against each other rather than working together with each other, because everybody has their own interests. And one of the ways, or one of the reasons this is, of course, is also the different incentive programs. So a head chef will be incentivized, or an F&B manager, on food costs. Then a revenue manager will be incentivized on revenue or profits, and so on. So you have different incentive programs in the different departments that actually conflict with each other, because everybody wants to achieve their budget and they want to achieve their incentive, but actually in doing so, they actually work against the other departments. So aligning those incentive programs can also help, so that you bring everybody together to work towards a common goal. So that's something that I would always advise as well, is trying to do that, and communicate. That's something that I said from the onset. So yeah, absolutely.
So I think we're coming sort of towards the end of our session. I'm just having a look to see if there's any questions for us. We're either very, very good in our conversation, because there's none in this box, or nobody wants to ask us something. But I think a good way to maybe wrap things up is, can we give some practical applications of what people can go and do to become more guest-centric in their revenue management approach?
Yeah, I think everything starts with a forecast. I think everybody should create a forecast, because then once you have a forecast, you're much clearer about what's going to happen. Then the second thing is be very clear about your ideal guest. Understand who your ideal guest is, and try to target that ideal guest rather than just setting your rates. And the worst thing you can do is look at your competitors and then say, okay, they're selling that rate, so that's why I'm going to sell that rate as well. Because the minute you start looking at your competitors first, you're following your competitors. And then you're really fighting a lost battle, because all you're doing is sort of using them as a frame of reference, rather than using your own hotel as a frame of reference, and using your own guests as a frame of reference. Because what you're doing is saying, well, they're pricing like that, so I'm going after the same guests. Whereas what you should be doing is saying, okay, what do my guests want to pay? And what is my value proposition, and what is that worth to my guests? So that should always be your starting point. So being careful about those rates is very important, but having that value proposition, and maybe step away from just pricing your rates. Maybe just going packages and say, okay, well, maybe I should package my rates and put multiple components in there. The simplest package element is obviously breakfast, but if you have a game lodge, or you can offer game drives within the packages and things like that. But it needs to be something that your guest wants, and that's what you need to find out. You need to find out who your guest is, what it is they want, and that should form the basis of your revenue management strategy. Pricing, everybody talks about full dynamic pricing. I think it's far more sensible to have just maybe a few tiers of pricing. That's a good starting point. Don't make it too complex. Keep it simple, because in the end, the price is one factor, but the most important factor is your product. Your product, that is what you're selling. And if you've got a good product, and if you've got a product that offers a good value proposition, the price is less relevant. And forget about what all those pricing engines that are out there, people that are selling pricing engines are saying. A lot of those pricing engines are based on commodity pricing engines. If you have a Sony television, it has a certain shelf life. The longer it sits on that shelf, they need to drop their rate, because they need to get rid of it. Because in 2 years' time, you're not going to be able to sell that television, because it hasn't got that certain functionality that you now need on televisions. Your hotel room doesn't have that limitation. Your hotel room is an experience. So the shelf life of a hotel room, obviously, you need to renovate and things like that, but the hotel room itself retains its value. So there's no, well, obviously you need to sell it, but it doesn't lose value of its shelf life. So that's the difference between commodity selling and hotel room selling. So be very wary of dropping your rates. Be very careful about pricing. Be cautious. Have a couple of levels rather than a full dynamic pricing. I think that's because full dynamic pricing becomes way too complex as well, and it's way too hard to manage. So that would be my advice.
I so agree with you, and I'm so inspired. I think I'm going to go back and look at all my guest expectations. Because, I mean, let's be honest, as revenue managers, we do become very clinical, very like, this is what the spreadsheet and the number says, so challenge ourselves. Yeah. Definitely do that. We still don't have any questions, so I think that's us for today, unless you have some final words.
I just want to say, revenue management is great. I love revenue management, and I think the guest should always be at the heart of our business. And one of my frustrations in the past, my wife is in sales, and I can see her frustrations as well. And sometimes you can see that the revenue management team at the company that she works for is very aggressive and becomes very aggressive when it comes to new corporate rates and things like that. And I just think, think of the long term, because it's all great to think of that short-term gain, but if you look at hotels that actually had a friendly policy and that actually were good to their clients and guests, they have performed far better in this period than other hotels. So treat your guests well, because in the end, they're the ones paying you and they're the ones bringing in the money. And always keep, remember who your guests are. Just focus on your guests and not the guests of the competitor next door, because you have a unique product. That product is unique because of you, because of the people in there, because of the experience that you're giving your guests. And it's not like the competitor next door. It's not like the lodge down the road. It is, you have a unique experience and you have your own guests. And those guests is, those are the most important to your business. And that's what you need to focus on.
Absolutely. And don't forget to communicate. Gosh.
Oh, yes.
Niels, thank you so much. And for everybody else.
Thank you very much, Teresa.
Today, very informative session. I'm really inspired. Appreciate your time. And we'll be in contact with everybody again.
And thanks everybody for joining. Please feel free to reach out if there are any questions that you have. I think it's we're all in this together, and let's hope the light of the end of the tunnel turns into a big lighting raging fire very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Keep well.